Hello and welcome to the Gig Stories podcast with me, Chris, and
Me? Is it me, or have you replaced me for this episode?
no, it's still you.
Yes, I'm still in, ladies and gentlemen. I'm still on the podcast.
It's still you. It's still you is the 3-word phrase that golfers never want to hear.
Why is that?
Because if you putt and then your ball is still further away than the other player, and they say it's still you, then it means you're not doing very well. So anyway,
look at this. We've got music, sport, no doubt philosophy.
Probably.
I mean, what a start to an episode, a podcast. If you're a brand new listener, it's like this all the time.
It's an absolute journey, this. It's a ride. It's a wild ride.
It's a wild ride. You won't have enough superlatives to describe this podcast. So how are you doing anyway, Mr. Payne? How's your week been?
Yeah, very well. Very well.
Have you been to any gigs?
No, and you said that in an intonation which indicated that you might well have been to a gig. Have you been to a gig, Alex?
Yeah, we know I've been to a gig. Genuinely, I couldn't remember if you'd shot a gig, or since our last episode, you'd shot Carl Barrett from Libertines.
Yeah.
But you haven't been to a gig in the past week or two?
No, but I'm getting itchy fingers. I want to photograph another gig very soon. So yeah, I'm gonna be getting the diary out and seeing what's what.
So you haven't got anything booked in yet?
Not at the moment. No, nothing.
Come on, Manchester venues, book this man. So I have been to a gig, and it was very unexpected. My wonderful, beautiful friend, one of my best friends in the world from Cardiff, James, gave me a call last minute and said, I'm heading up to Manchester and we're going to go and hang out with idols and watch idols. And he's friends with Joe, the lead singer, and had a weekend off, so it came up. So I had a lovely afternoon with him. We had ramen, obviously.
Of course.
Why wouldn't you, when in Manchester? And then in the evening, saw their live gig. And I've always had my eye on idols, but I'm not going to pretend I don't know all the tracks. I'm very much sort of aware of all the singles, but I can't pretend I'm a diehard fan. And it was quite revelatory. I was mesmerized from the start of the gig to the very end. So if any of you know idols, and if you don't, go and have a listen. I know people refer to them as post-punk. I'm not sure that's accurate, but it gives you a vague idea. The drummer is just brilliant, and really is that sort of cliche, that driving force. And then you have the bass player who stands very close to the drums but doesn't move.
Or one of them, right? Okay.
Yeah, which I think is sort of quite fascinating. And then you've got the two guitarists who are unreal. They do not stop from the moment they get on stage, and there's no doubting their efforts and their commitment to playing that music. And then if you know anything about idols, they have Joe Talbot, one of, I can now say, currently one of the best front people of a band out there, I think. Like I've said before on the podcast, when I saw Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, and I couldn't take my eyes off Nick Cave, and I just watched him wherever he went. Couldn't take my eyes off. And it was similar with Joe. Not quite the same, because those guitarists are doing so much. I want to watch what they're up to. But they came on, and there was a genuine sincerity. I don't doubt that what Joe is singing about, he really means. And he's singing about all kinds of things: masculinity, toxic masculinity, really, homophobia, race issues. It was very similar to when I was younger and was going to the early Mannix gigs, and there was sort of activism and great music plus activism, and that's what I felt. There was some dark, brooding musical madness that just felt, yes, punk, rock and roll, get lost in that. But then also, it sort of felt evangelical in a way of, if Joe starts a cult or runs for office or for BM, whatever, I'm going to be right behind him. And I felt sort of compelled to look at political issues. This sounds really, really rubbish and trite, but I almost wish I was a teenager in that mosh pit, because I think experiencing idols, that must be incredible.
And why didn't you go into the mosh pit? You're only 49.
Do you know what? Do you know what I did though? I did. I went all over the place.
I bet you did, mate. I've seen you go all over the place.
I was throwing kids everywhere, and that actually was interesting. The average person there, I couldn't tell you the average person was, because there was absolute mix of male, female, black, white, and every age. There was some youngsters there, and like me, there were some oldies, and I thought that was brilliant.
Well, that bodes well for their longevity if they've got such a wide range. I mean, because if we do think back to Britpop, thinking back now, you could kind of tell that it wasn't going to last, because everyone was 18, 19, 20, really. I didn't. Well, maybe that's because I was down the front the whole time.
Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, I couldn't have imagined going up the back. But as I've mentioned in previous pods, now I can't imagine anything worse than being right the way down the front.
Do you know what you've made? Yeah, you've said something there that I don't think has crossed my mind about Britpop. I think there were a few bands that we just knew sort of they transcended Britpop. You know, Blur, Oasis, Pulp, and I stand corrected with other bands. In fact, Shed 7. We've had Rick Witter from Shed 7 on this podcast, and they're as successful now. They're playing some of their biggest tours. So whatever they had, there's longevity. But you're right. I think a lot of those Britpop gigs, it was just our peers. It was our peers, unless we were just young and ignorant. I don't know.
Well, we were that as well. But just in terms of it as a cultural movement or whatever, it wasn't. I mean, that's being a bit too grand about it. But the majority of bands, they're still going just now. So you can go and see Sleeper, you can go and see Echo Belly, you can go and see.
But that's only very, very recently. Isn't it?
Exactly. That's what I mean. So basically, they there hasn't been that longevity, apart from the big names. Suede I would put in there as well, I think maybe. But no,
that's a good point, because actually as well with Idols, this is their 4th album, and it's their 2nd in 2 years, which is quite unusual these days,
considering one of those years didn't exist, basically.
That's right, absolutely. And actually it's this tour now that they're playing their biggest dates. They sold out Cardiff Arena.
Were you saying they were doing something like 4 nights at the Barrowlands?
Again, could be 3, but it was definitely 3, if not 4 nights at Barrowlands. Wow. And they did 3 nights at Victoria Warehouse, Manchester, and I think Victoria Warehouse, which is always all standing, is 3,500. So this is a big tour. So longevity, I think they've got it. But do you know what? It was right up my alley, Chris.
Yeah.
It really really appealed to me, and it was a mixture of things. The lighting design I thought was incredible. I think it had a review in the MEN or maybe Enemy or somewhere, and they underplayed the lighting. Too simple or something like. No, it really helped capture a mood. It was very clever. And then the look, the sound, and then what I took away mentally from it was pretty much a perfect performance for me.
It sounds like they rattled your cage a bit, which is always a good thing. But that leads us on to our guest for this week, because at some point we do talk about, trying to regain that feeling that you get when you're 18 and going to a gig, and at some points, when you're a bit older, you feel like you're never going to get that again, just because you've got no, when you're 18, you've got no cares, or not as many as you do when you've got kids and mortgage and jobs and all that kind of stuff. And but it shows, this sounds like you've managed to kind of rekindle that, and our guest today talks about that as well, which is really interesting. Who's the guest? Who's the guest this week, Alex?
So let's be honest. When we started this podcast, this guest was, if not first, second. I mean, at least in the top one, as Brian Clough, would say, were on my mind to get on the podcast. And it's the truly brilliant Pete Paphides. And as it happens, Pete's podcast, which was the Times Weekly music podcast, was the very first podcast I ever listened to. And off the top of my head, I think it would have been about 2005, maybe 6. Mm-hmm. And it was just brilliant. And he had wonderful interviews with all kinds of guests, and they were always interesting. And if you had heard of them or not heard of them, Pete just manages just to get so much information and so much character from his guests. And I love the way Pete writes, and I love his passion. He's we're very much part of his tribe, I think, Chris. He just loves his music, live music, recorded music.
Well, here we go with episode 31. It is Pete Paphides.
Welcome to the Gig Stories podcast, as always, with me and him. And today, this is just so exciting, because when Chris and I first decided we were going to do this podcast, this person was genuinely top of my list from the moment we said, right, let's do it. He's also the man responsible for the very first podcast I ever listened to, the Times Music Weekly podcast. He's a wonderful musical journalist and writer, documentary maker, Mr. Vinyl Revival, autobiography, Broken Greek, radio DJ, Pete Paphides. How are you, lovely man?
Well, after that intro, I'm flying high. I'm maybe too high. Maybe.
Is there anything you can't do? Come on, Pete.
Well, you've clearly never played football with me.
You know what? I was just going to say he's all right at football too, but don't put yourself down, Pete.
We played football together.
No, do you know what? We almost did. We nearly did when I had my my short spell living in London before the BBC rudely took me to Manchester. Yeah, are you still playing?
Very rarely. I mean, the recovery time gets pretty long when you get to my age, and so I'm constantly trying to sort of stretch my glutes. So any idle moment, if I'm sort of like walking around the neighborhood, then if I see a road sign that's kind of at the right height for me to kind of haul my left leg onto it and then lean forward to get a quick glute stretch, then that's me. And I do that in the hope that I might be able to save my football career.
Do you walk past a game in the park on the, just hoping that a ball will stray into your path?
Yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
You're a player short?
Yeah, absolutely. I always sort of like, I always try and return. I always feel nervous when I try and execute an accurate pass back to the small children that are gazing on at me, and just in the hope that they might say, "Yeah, come over here. You're clearly not too old to join us." And
see, it's so nerve-wracking in that moment, isn't it? It's the worst moment, especially with the kids, and especially seeing. I don't know if you've seen that footage of Ellis James where he kicks the ball to the kid and it just clocks him straight in the knackers. And the kid, it was absolutely, and they catch it on camera. Oh, it's absolutely brilliant. So no, I stay away from that now. Stay away from that. Thank you, Pete, for finding time, because you just have, I'm going to guess, a crazy schedule, because you are all over the place doing lots of wonderful things.
We all have these days, don't we? I mean, we're all sort of spread quite thinly because part of it is, for good reasons, for nice reasons, because there are so many kind of nice things like this that you're kind of asked to do, and it's hard. I can't bear the idea of not doing it, and writing, I try and do as much writing as possible because it's the thing I do. But when you get old, I'm 52, and I've noticed actually the admin of life gets in the way of the fun bits. So and it must be true for anyone. So the quarterly tax return comes around awfully quickly, and then just the so much paperwork comes in, and okay, so that's true of me. Then imagine. I'm really kind of getting not to compare myself with these people, but I'm really getting an understanding of why musicians who were in bands that would just release like an album a year 30 years ago are now only able to sort of release an album every five years or something, because
Yes.
What happens as you get older is you're dragging a lot of dead weight around, some of it literal in my case, but also the dead weight of accumulated admin and kind of and sort of messages that you have to respond to, or else someone might arrest you or something, or for whatever bill that you haven't paid, or parking charge. I mean, there's always something, isn't there?
Yeah.
So,
when did life get so rock and roll, Pete?
Of course, that's why, like our heroes are sort of taking so long to make new albums, because there's just so much shit to sort out, isn't there?
So when you were writing, well, certainly writing Broken Creep, I'm just interested in your writing regime anyway. Do you like a deadline? Do you write when inspired? Do you set aside a couple of hours and you don't move until you've reached a certain number? I mean, in terms of the autobiography, was it you just sat down and went, right, was born, and then worked from there? Or...
Well, the first thing I did, it was mostly written in cafes, because cafes, no one can really find you in a cafe, so that's great. You're sort of like, and it's a real treat to be in a cafe writing, because once in a while someone will come over to you and say, "Would you like another coffee?" And that's great, And with the book, I just started. I never thought I'd ever really write a book. I thought that was something that, like, quote unquote, proper writers did. But at the same time, I sort of thought that there was a story there. I wanted to write so it's a childhood memoir, and I wanted to write about a book about how pop music is very crucial in sort of allowing you to. It's a space in which you can really work out who you are, and the way you work out who you are is by virtue of the records that you choose. The records that you choose are sort of telling you something about yourself and about your story, and I think that's the reason why you love them. Yeah. And I really wanted to give that version of the story of how we fall in love with music. And it happens very organically. It happens in a very unself-conscious way, because in the first 10, 15 years of our lives, we are very unself-conscious about the music that we love. And I really wanted to get back into that headspace. And I'm very fortunate. I've got a good memory of my early years. So I felt it was something I could do. Of course, the great thing about music is it takes you there. You remember who you were. You remember what your fears were, what your hopes were. They're all kind of baked into the relationship you have with the records that you love.
Yeah. I was going to ask you that, because I know we all experience things differently. Is it a physical reaction for you? Like for me, so when I hear Lionel Richie's Dancing on the Ceiling, any tracks from that album, which was an early gift to me, one of my first albums.
Yeah.
I remember where I was in our living room, how our living room looked, but also how I felt, and the heat from the house, weird things like that. It's a physical manifestation to me. Is that how you react to sort of musical memories?
Yeah. A Little More Love by Olivia Newton-John is a case in point. When I listen to A Little More Love, I can smell panini stickers.
Wow.
I know that it's around the time that coincides the time that I was quite obsessed with collecting my Panini football stickers, and so things like that, and just it's quite that whole synesthetic kind of spell that overcomes you when you go back to records, especially from the earlier years in your life.
Oh,
so,
yeah,
totally
absolutely.
agree.
I've got one with the Land of Make Believe, Bucks Fizz, and I associate it with. I can remember where the Christmas tree was in the room in my house in Scotland, and I remember being under the tree, and I remember being a naughty child, and there was a present that was under the tree, and I remember, just touching it and going, "Oh, what's that?" And it was a Batman car. I remember that, but I've got a taste as well, because I remember I was eating a packet of Golden Wonder cheese and onion. But I associate all of that with that piece of music, and it's all the better for it, I think.
Do you know what? I feel like I'm in a safe space here.
Oh yeah, we are.
Because when I hear Dr. Hook, Sexy Eyes, or When You're in Love, I can feel my hand, because I touched the iron. My mum was ironing. I was a little toddler at home, and Dr. Hook was playing in the background. And for whatever reason, as a 3-year-old or however old I was, I just touched the iron and burnt my hand. And whenever I hear, and Dr. Hook was playing in the background, and whenever I hear Dr. Hook, I immediately feel, burnt right hand from the iron.
Flesh.
Yes. I mean,
What a visceral response to Dr. Hook. The Land of Make Believe was apparently written about Thatcherism. Do you know this? It was written about
No.
Yeah, the people who were Andy Hill and Nicola, I can't remember what her surname was, but they wrote it about the kind of the sort of promises of wealth and prosperity that the kind of false. It was a sort of slightly sarcastic song about this kind of new age that Margaret Thatcher was ushering in. So that's quite, I found that out.
Not know that.
A couple of years ago.
They were a cracking band, Bucks Fizz.
Oh, yeah, I mean, but maybe I should get them at my imaginary festival, which I think we're going to talk about later on.
Oh, we'll do it with because I've interviewed Andy Parisi a couple of times, and he drummed for Bucks Fizz for several years. Yeah, several years, and he kind of took me down a wormhole of looking at the lesser known Bucks Fizz stuff, certainly the stuff that he was playing at the time, and great band, really good. I've got one of my I Hear Talk, which was a very minor hit for them in 1985, late 1985. Is a massive, huge favorite of mine. Yeah, same.
Great Lost Fleetwood Mac song, doesn't it? It's got that kind of adult, slightly kind of sort of complicated emotional sophistication that you also go to ABBA for. So
and I'm baffled as to why Steps never covered it, because it's absolutely Steps through and through, that song, isn't it?
Yeah, for a sort of mature kind of relaunch, that would have been perfect for them. But that's why we should be A&R men, but sadly we never got the call, did we?
No.
Not too late.
Do you know the biggest Bucks Fizz fan I know in my life?
Who?
Justin Fletcher, Mr. Tumble.
Really? Wow.
What Justin doesn't know about Bucks Fizz isn't worth knowing.
Wow.
Really? And he's quite sort of like upfront about it. It's sort of like
totally.
Oh, that's nice.
Do you know what? I'm surprised and also not surprised in equal measure.
Oh, he knows. He knows his. He knows his. I mean, grief. This is really chat for a pub. But the son of Guy Fletcher, Guy Fletcher, the only British songwriter to write a single for Elvis, and
really. Well, I didn't know this.
Yeah. In fact, a lovely moment, especially for, and I know I have some sort of my old CBeebies parents that are listeners. I had this lovely moment where myself, Andy, Mr. Maker, and Justin, we went to see the Jersey Boys in London not long after it opened, because one of the songs, which was just on the tip of my tongue, that's gone, but I'll get to it, was written by Justin's dad. He wrote a song for Frankie Valli, and they used it in Jersey Boys, and it's the it's the heartbreaking song, and I don't know if you've seen the show.
I'd love to.
It's a fabulous show. It's absolutely fantastic, and he's just lost his daughter, and he sings this just beautiful song. It'll come to me, and it was just really nice.
Oh,
witnessing that with Justin.
Watching that. That'd be
amazing. Watching that, thinking, oh, my dad wrote this. Well, there's a random one for you in the podcast. So Pete, want to get stuck in, and before we ask you sort of about more recent times, I mean, please, anyone listen, check out Pete's book, Broken Greek, and you'll find out more in-depth answers to what we're going to ask now. But if we take you back, when did you fall in love with music, and sort of when did that turn into you going to live music?
Well, I don't know what the criteria are for a first gig, because does it have to be the first gig that you kind of actually bought tickets for yourself? So if it was a gig you went to with your parents, would that count? I don't know. What would you?
Totally. We have this conversation because you're right. There's different answers. Chris and I both had similar upbringings in as much as we both grew up playing instruments, and our parents took us from very early age to sort of classical concerts. My mum would take me and would pay a few pounds to sit in the gods in St. David's Hall in Cardiff, and I'd watch, Vivaldi's Four Seasons or whatever. And then, of course, there's the first gig that my parents paid for me, which was Michael Jackson. And then the first gig I paid for myself was the Shaman in Newport Centre. And you have all these. So, but what is the first? What is the first live concert you remember, or live music you remember?
The first live concert I remember, I've got a very, very dim memory of accompanying my mum to the Birmingham Odeon to see a Greek composer and songwriter and his band, Mikis Theodorakis, and that was I remember, but I don't remember too much about it because I remember falling asleep 3 songs in, and it would have been a blessed relief for my mum, because then she could have just enjoyed the gig. But then there were sort of things I really kind of harangued my parents to get tickets to see. I guess I don't know how well known they are now, but a sort of a long, venerable British comedy group, the Barron Knights, in Cabaret at the a club in Solihull, kind of cabaret night spot called the New Cresta in Solihull, and I was obsessed with the Barron Knights. I was quite a strange child, really. I was sort of I saw for people who don't know, the Barron Knights, they've been around since the sort of 60s, and their thing was that they would sort of release these songs that were kind of 3-song medleys of well-known hits, which they would write new kind of comical lyrics to, typically kind of outlandish sort of scenarios, and they had a very big hit at the end of 1978 with one of these singles called "A Taste of Aggro," which was so they sang new lyrics to "Rivers of Babylon," which had just been a hit for Boney M, and then what was it? Another Brick in the Wall, and so, another anyway, and
in a medley. Sorry, was this in a medley?
It was a medley. It was a 3-song medley.
Rivers of Babylon, Another Brick in the Wall. I'm intrigued to find out what the third one was.
It'll come to me. I've just had a bit of a kind of the blank. So the first with the Rivers of Babylon, they sang. There's a dentist in Birmingham who fixed my crown, and while I slept, he filled my mouth with iron. So I saw this on Top of the Pops, and honestly, it was like punk for me. It was like my punk, because I didn't know. It seemed like the naughtiest thing anyone could do, to take someone else's song and write disrespectful lyrics over it. And they had this kind of slightly cheeky, naughty, schoolboyish kind of air about them when they did it. And I actually thought it was an insurrectionary act that I was watching. So I was so kind of had my head turned so sufficiently by this that it was my first record, it was my first 7-inch single. So anyway, and because I was kind of quite weird, I carried on. They stopped they released lots more singles, but they stopped charting. But I would still go to the local record shop and order, because it was like having a favorite football team or something. Like the Barron Knights were my band,
Yeah.
And so when they came to do Cabaret in Birmingham, sort of at least 2 years later, almost 3 years later, that's how loyal I was, still buying their records. They did things like, they're very opportunistic. So when the whole sort of, when Dallas was really popular, and there was that cliffhanger about who shot JR, then they released a single called "We Know Who Did It," which was all about And then there was a famous dog trainer called Barbara Woodhouse.
Oh yeah.
And
oh yes.
Yeah. And they released a single called "The Sit Song," where one of them pretended to be Barbara Woodhouse and
Walkie,
all of that. Yeah. And then they had put out a single called "Mr. Rubik," which was a kind of cash in on the Rubik's Cube.
Wow.
They were kind of beseeching Mr. Rubik to tell them how to kind of solve the puzzle. I just thought this was all fantastic, and so I was taken to see the Barron Knights by my parents in the New Cresta Club in Solihull. It was very like chicken in a basket, kind of quite sort of. Obviously, this was 1981, so everyone was smoking. You could barely see the band cigarette smoke, and that's why I realized. I realize now that's why there's kind of those nightclubs had those little kind of lights sort of studied into the ground, so that you could sort of follow where you were going, because there was so much cigarette smoke that you needed to. They're almost like cat's eyes or something, or like a landing strip in an airport.
How old would you have been at that gig, Pete?
I was 11, I think, or 12. I think it was the summer of 1981, I think, and no, it was the autumn of 1981, and I took I was like a complete. I had a carrier bag full of Barron Knights records. So when they said that they'd be signing copies of their new album in the foyer afterwards, I kind of like, marched along with my carrier bag full of Barron Knights records, and they're all sort of sitting apart from each other. They're all just having a fag and kind of talking to a mate or whatever, and they saw this kind of weird little. Of course, they'd just been doing a fucking gig, like they were knackered. They only wanted signed copies of their new album. They didn't want to sign, like, they didn't want some weird kid to present them with their entire back catalogue and say, "Can you sign all of these, please?"
Were you the only 12-year-old at that gig, Pete?
Oh, probably, yeah. I mean, it was. I was just kind of like getting it wrong. I mean, that's, as you know, like the book is really kind of a series of stories in which I just somehow kind of get it wrong. I'm really trying to participate in in life, in to try and get the hang of being a normal kid, and just somehow it wasn't really working for me, because I was making some bad decisions, such as being an obsessive Barron Knights fan. And,
I'm all right with that. I had Shakin' Stevens. You had the Barron Knights, Pete.
Tell you what, Alex, I was listening. Like, I've really, I make these when I go out for a run. I make these playlists of songs that will get me going, and I put This Old House is on my current playlist. It's such a well-produced record. I mean, it is just, you cannot fault it. It's just sort of, it totally stands up. It's kind of time. It's time. It just doesn't really belong to any era. It's just such a. It really kind of gets you going. I thought, hats off, Shaky. You've really sort of
hats off, Shaky.
Somehow managed to honor the spirit of rock and roll, that kind of the early kind of countryish kind of roots of rock and roll, which you hear in those early Elvis singles, and yet it was well enough produced to kind of give Adam and the Ants a run for his money. That's quite a trick.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think if you got in a time machine and went back to like a 6-year-old's birthday party around about 1982, so that's me basically. Everyone would be perfecting that. The Elvis thing where the knees locked and onto the tiptoes. Every kid was doing that.
I can still do it.
Yeah, I can't.
Oh. Oh, that's a boast.
I know. Thankfully, you can only see me from the shoulders up, but maybe I'll adjust my camera later on. And
I don't know if I've mentioned this. I probably have, but I was, massive Shaky fan, and my mum says someone bought me a sweater, or it was her, perhaps, that bought me a sweater with Shakin' Stevens on, doing that exact pose that we're on about, and she'd have to take it off me at night when I was asleep because I'd sleep in it. But next door, my best friend, she was the same age as me. Shakin' Stevens was her uncle. And so me and my sisters, there would be moments where Shakin' Stevens would be coming to visit, and we'd be in the garden trying to peer over our fence so that we could get a glimpse of Shaky in the flesh. It was literally the most exciting thing as a young kid ever. Shakin' Stevens is next door.
Did they call him Uncle Shaky? Or was it just Uncle Mike?
No. Mike. Yeah, I think Nicola called, because we grew up together, me and Nick, and I think she called him Uncle Mike, which just blew my mind.
Yeah, I mean, it would though, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it was bonkers.
You can barely compute. I bet he probably wanted to be left alone a bit, didn't he? I don't think he liked children, but I got the vibe that he probably didn't like children very much.
Yeah. I mean, there are some clips of him on chat shows or Saturday morning chat shows where he doesn't look over enamored to be there.
Even in the video for Merry Christmas, everyone, he's not comfortable around. He's looking at the clock on the wall, just waiting to be told that he's done enough.
Yeah.
He's just, I've got other stories I'll have to tell you off.
I'm sure. I've heard a couple as well.
Yes.
Anyway,
so moving on, what then would you consider? So Chris and I have had to sort of make the decision on, what do we think the first gig that we bought the ticket ourselves and what we consider is cool. Now, obviously, cool is different to. So, mine is possibly the Shaman, although I felt like I sort of had to because I was going with my sister's boyfriend, and I was more intrigued.
What era of Shaman are we talking about?
Oh, it was 92. So that first album.
Right.
And it was a great concert. It was a great concert. But I think my first one would have been James, which was Laid tour and Radiohead supporting.
I saw that tour. I remember that was the first time I heard them do Nice Dream, and I remember being like clocking that and thinking, oh wow, can't wait to hear this on an album.
2 years later, wasn't it?
Yeah, God, it was quite a wait, wasn't it? Because the recording the bends was not a harmonious process for them. But they were an amazing band to see around that time. They've always been an amazing band, though. I could talk about Radiohead for this whole podcast, to be honest.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely love them. So, what would you say was yours then, Pete?
Well, similar situation to you. So I did actually. No one forced me to buy tickets to go and see Toyah at the Birmingham Odeon in 1982. But I was so. I'm so far away from being in the cool gang at school, and so let's be frank, unpopular. That but there was a girl in my class who I'm not going to be able to name her because I had to change her name for the book, and I can't remember what I called her in the book. There was a girl in my class who was a big Toyah fan, who she was regarded as she was like the prettiest girl in the class. And so I thought it'd be an amazing coup if I got tickets to see Toyah. And she was so impressed because she was a massive Toyah fan. She was so impressed by my great taste that she kind of became sort of friendly to me and heaven forbid, even sort of ask me out. Now, I have to stress that this is a plan that had no ending. This was because I was sort of, I knew nothing. I hadn't sort of, like some boys in my class had started kind of, let's say, physically changing, and entering adolescence, as it were. None of this had happened to me, so I wouldn't have known. There was nothing. It wasn't like, I don't really know why I was so determined to sort of initiate a sort of process that manifestly would have been uncomfortable with. It was purely an attempt to sort of get some kind of leverage as someone, so the alpha kids in my class might turn around and say, whoa, Paphides, I almost said her name. Anyway, it went wrong for all sorts of terrible reasons, which I've kind of mentioned in the book. And it obviously didn't work. And even if it had worked, I wouldn't have known what to do with my new status. So the actual first gig I went to for reasons of actually liking the band was Aztec Camera in Aston University in December 1983. And that was on the back of an epiphanic kind of obsession I had with Aztec Camera after buying their debut album, Highland Hard Rain. And for me, he was like kind of my sort of, I guess he was my Bob Dylan, all of that kind of rolled into my Morrissey, my Bob Dylan, all of that rolled into one. I was just sort of, he was like my first template of someone who, God, wouldn't it be amazing to be like him, or wouldn't it be amazing to know what he knows? Because he was still very young. He was, I think, 18 or 19 when that album came out. Yeah. But he kind of, he had this amazing fringed suede jacket, and he'd grown his hair a little bit longer. I had quite long hair as well. And I remember there was a video for a single off that album, Walk Out to Winter, which was shown on breakfast televisions on TVAM. On the newly launched TVAM at 5 to 8, they would show a pop video for a new release. And, just the last thing I did before I went to school was I would record that day's video and walk out to winter. And I was obsessed, kind of like, I guess it was probably like a crush, really. I just watched Roddy Frame over and over again in his suede jacket. And then later on, I bought the album. I remember my brother coming. My brother was 4 years older than me. Older brothers can just walk into a room and just cut you dead, just completely flatten you with some well-chosen work.
Yeah.
And he was looking at me just staring at Roddy Frame adoringly. And he said, I'm just going to say this. Don't even think about buying a jacket like that, because you will look like a complete twat in it.
Nice.
Oh, no, I wasn't going to do that. Leave me alone.
I was going to say he still had it, 2 or 3 years later when Somewhere in My Heart came out, because I remember that was where they first came into my kind of consciousness, and he had these, were they kind of like stonewashed jeans on, and
and a leather jacket.
And his guitar, and he just looked, and the white t-shirt, the kind of Nick Cayman look as well. It was kind of all about the same kind of time.
Nick Cayman, wow.
Yeah.
I remember on a Saturday Superstore. They had a thing called the Pop Panel.
Yes.
And they got whoever the guests were on that morning show would gather around on a kind of bench, crescent-shaped bench, and they'd play 3 videos, and they'd all say what they thought about it. And Kenneth Baker, the Secretary of State for Education, was I think he was the Secretary for Education, fairly sure he was one of the guests on there. And I was very confused, because he was a Tory, and I hated the Tories, as was mandatory.
Yes, exactly.
In 1987, I'm not that I love them now, of course, but anyway, that's but it was like, I'm 52 now, and if a member of the cabinet said they liked one of my favorite bands, I wouldn't be thrown into a tailspin like I was in 1987 when Kenneth Baker said, "I rather liked that. And I rather like his look. He's got a bit of Eddie Cochran about him." I remember thinking, this is confusing. Like what? What am I even supposed to think now?
Roddy Frame loved that.
It would be awful.
Yeah, well, and it was like, I remember another time on the Pop Panel, there was a group called Thrashing Dubs, whose career was instantly destroyed when Margaret Thatcher said that she liked that video.
God,
that was it for Thrashing Dubs. They never recovered from that.
It'd be like It'd be like if Jacob Rees-Mogg said, "Oh, I love Santan Dave or Stormzy." My daughter Grace would just be like, "No, this is terrible. This could never happen."
Yeah, and Dave would have to really issue, a forthright rebuke,
Yes, at the next Brit Awards,
exactly, in order to kind of shore up the situation.
What do you consider your first gig in a professional capacity?
Oh, well, what was the first gig I reviewed for a music paper?
Because how old would you have been, Pete, when you...
about 22, I think. So I just finished university and I was getting... and Melody Maker offered to sort of try me out, as it were, And...
was that through you contacting them saying... Gives a job, or
I edited a fanzine which found its way onto the desks of a couple of sort of senior writers at Melody Maker, and then one of them, the reviews editor Andrew Miller, said that if I wanted to try out reviewing, see if I could do a review, then and if it was any good, then they might sort of publish it. So I suggested a few possibilities, and one of them was it was a group called the Sand Kings, who were a West Midlands group, and probably best known for the fact that Jazz Man, later of Babylon Zoo, was their lead singer. And
what?
Yeah, Jazz Man.
How old is Jazz Man?
Well, I guess he's probably in his mid-50s now, I would imagine, because we're all getting old, aren't we?
Wow, that's very funny, because
I feel like this podcast is being hijacked by Jazz Man and Babylon Zoo.
In our last episode, Pete, we had James Walsh from Star Sailor.
Yeah.
In one of his first live ever performances as a kid in college with his band, they covered Spaceman by Babylon Zoo. Really? And I actually, James did a guerrilla sort of busking gig at Tim Burgess's Final Adventures in Manchester, and he played in Piccadilly train station. And so I went along, and I actually had my own copy of Babylon Zoo Spaceman that I presented to him. And so Jazz Man seems to be following us, Chris. I don't know what's going on here.
It started off, it was Shawaddy Waddy at the start of the podcasts, and now it's Jazz Man.
Yeah, so it's gone from Catherine Williams staring at Shawaddy Waddy's balls in their leggings.
Wow.
There's an image, eh? Yeah. You've not had your lunch yet, have you?
Hang on. Shawaddy Waddy were wearing leggings.
Yeah, she said they were like up close. Underneath those jackets, they were like black spandex leggings, and she said
they just left little to the imagination.
And she said, as a very young girl, she just was horrified, should we say?
Dave Bartram's tuberous gonads.
I was going to say, what's for lunch today, Pete?
Yes, I might skip lunch actually. No, yeah.
Now, in between those two gigs, then, so we've had your first gig there.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, the Aztec Camera gig was quite a sort of it was quite hard to get into, because I joined the fan club, and they so it was a televised gig. It was recorded for a TV series called Rock Goes to College, where bands would play a student union somewhere. It was like a Whittle Test offshoot, and
right, okay.
And they said, like anyone who wants free tickets to go and see Aztec Camera going to be in the next series of Rock Goes to College, but you have to be over 18 to get in. So that was a bit of a problem for me, because I was 14 at this point. And but I was determined. I was going to get into this Aztec Camera gig, and so I had to really plan and strategize. Well, the first thing I had to do was decide who I was going to take with me, and so I asked the oldest looking kid in my year at school if he wanted to come to a gig with me. That was Imtiaz Ilahi, who was in the class above me, in the academic class above me, same age as me. His dad was a bus driver. I remember him well. And Imtiaz had a lot of Imtiaz kind of had quite a lot of downy kind of fur on his face, which made him look a little bit older. And so he agreed to come with me. And I thought, okay, what do students, I need to look like a student. So I looked in my, fairly sparse wardrobe, and there was a pair of mustard-coloured corduroy trousers. I thought that's probably what students wear. They wear cords. So I went to see it. So I had a pair of mustard-coloured corduroy trousers and a baggy sort of just jumper, and my hair was sort of quite long and sort of shaggy. So I tried to affect a kind of casual studenty sort of gait. And I thought I'll just probably I'll just mooch in, And on the tickets, it said doors open at 6:45. And of course, God knows why we turned up at, what would it have been? We turned up at 7:30 and there wasn't a soul there. I mean, obviously we turned up way too early. I thought I'd got the wrong night. And so we were already sort of stuck out like sore thumbs.
Oh, no.
I'd nicked my brother's NUS card and just removed the photograph of him and put a photograph of me on it. And they didn't even ask us for it in the end, because obviously what we all know now is that these gigs are just kind of, the security at these gigs, certainly in the 80s, was kind of was done by these just listless kind of undergraduates who just waved me in, and I just kind of very passionately mouthed all of Roddy's lyrics back at him whilst he tried not to look at me, because why on earth would you want to look at someone that looked like me passionately mouthing the words?
I have no doubt Roddy Frame remembered you. Have you ever asked him?
No, but I hope he doesn't. And similarly, I hope he doesn't remember all the fan letters I sent him.
Excellent.
Does he know about this? Surely you've interviewed him.
I've interviewed him. I try and keep that information quite vague, just in case. He said, "Oh, you're that guy."
Yes.
You're that guy we put on the red list for all the rest of our gigs.
It's awful, isn't it? Meeting your heroes. Oh, no. Do you happen to have the ticket stub? Are you a ticket stub collector?
I've got that ticket. I've kept that ticket because it was quite a nice kind of card. I'll send it to you after this. But I've got that was a nice one.
Do you tend to hang on to tickets and memorabilia, or is it only select things? Or?
There is a scrapbook that I've got. I've mislaid the scrapbook, but the scrapbook that's got most of my tickets in, I sort of kept them in my late teens. And then I kind of got a bit aloof about it, and not so much after that. But I've got a couple of There's a scrapbook. There's a special scrapbook which I didn't put tickets in, but I put things that were just of quote unquote historical importance. And I think my Live Aid ticket might be in that one. And
you were at Live Aid.
I was at Live Aid, So that's
right. Well, that's an entire podcast on its own, I think.
Well, I'm here. I'll tell you anything you like about what I remember about it.
Well, what do you remember about the day when? Because it's piping hot. You wouldn't have known the exact lineup or much of the lineup when you got there, because it was changing all the time anyway. So yeah, go.
Live Aid for me was I was very invested in Live Aid. I was very proud. I was a big, again, as I've said, with regard to the Barron Knights, I was weirdly loyal towards bands that I liked. I couldn't be like a normal kid, the normal thing you would expect kids to do is just kind of like an artist while they're having hit singles and then move on. It's quite a merciless business being a young pop fan. But I was weirdly loyal. I kind of wanted, I almost thought that, one day I might meet these people and they would test me and they say, how many of my records have you got? And then I would able to be truly show and they'd say, yeah, you're cool. Come on the tour bus with us and join our gang. You don't have to do your O-levels. And
that's exactly how it works, Pete.
Well, I tell you what, weirdly enough, sometimes it's actually weird when one of your musical heroes comes to your house, because then you start to get slightly worried that they might think that you're a kind of mad stalker. And what often happens is you kind of go through your records and you sort of hide about half the records you've got by them, just in case they start to feel scared.
Well, you can't skip over that, Peach. You cannot skip over that. Who has been to your house and whose records did you have to hide?
Well, in a weird confluence of events, we had some people over for dinner, and Neil Finn was one of them. I just remember sort of thinking, this is kind of weird. This is sort of, one day I thought that, this is the kind of weird logic, quote unquote logic, that informs your decision to become a completist over an artist, is that subconsciously you think that one day they might knock on their door and say, for instance, "Hi Pete, it's obviously Michael Stipe, you know who I am. You go around, you make quite a lot of noise about how much of a fan of my band you are, but how much of a fan of my band are you really? I just thought I'm in town, so I thought I'd just come and check." And we are actually currently doing an audit to see who our biggest fan is. And once we've all the stats are in, and we know who our biggest fan is, we thought we'd just invite them to just hang around with us forever. Just to be clear about this, you won't have to get a proper job.
Yes.
Make any other plans in your life. You'll just be part of the REM family, and we'll just look after you indefinitely. And we'll probably think of a nickname for you. Yeah.
You can chip in though. It's not going to be horrible. You can chip in with the nickname as well. Yeah. And if we like it, then you can keep that. So.
And he'll go to Mike Mills, who kind of does all the kind of admin of this. He says,
"Yeah. Of course.
See which nicknames are taken. Is Brains still available?" No, you can have Brains. Great.
Can I ask then? Because I've met you a few times, and I know that you are a fanboy. And there's a couple of questions that come to mind. What kind of person are you? How do you act? So you just sneaked in there, Neil Finn, which literally blows my mind. And if I'm not mistaken, isn't Crowded House partly what brought you and Kathleen, your wife, together?
Yeah.
An appreciation of Crowded House.
Yeah. So okay, let's step through this. I decided quite early on that when I became initially obsessed with Crowded House, they were not a particularly cool band for someone like me to get obsessed with, because I was in the height of my kind of C86 had happened. I was kind of, I was a sort of self-avowed kind of indie kid, and I was trying to get into all sorts of cool things, developing interest in reggae and other kind of genres of music that I guess maybe you wouldn't expect all 16-year-olds in 1986, 87 to get into. Yeah. But anyway, I'd clocked "Don't Dream It's Over." I knew I loved that song. I'd bought it, and I bought the album after the debut Crowded House album, Temple of Low Men, and I quickly got obsessed with it. I realized sometimes I still think it might be my favorite Crowded House album. It's just a very sort of emotionally dark record. Not what I was expecting, because they were very kind of peddled and promoted and marketed as, mainstream pop contenders, albeit adult pop contenders. And there was a real sort of emotional depth. The melodies were just intricate and beautiful, and very kind of drew from a deep emotional well. And I was like, I was hooked. And so I stayed hooked on them. Halfway through my degree, when they came back with Woodface, I did a degree. I did my degree in West Wales in Lampeter, and to get to Lampeter from the board, they did they did a sort of couple of gigs at the borderline just to sort of create some anticipation for Woodface, and I couldn't get a ticket. It was sold out, but I'd heard that they would be releasing 30 sort of tickets on the night for people on a first come first serve basis. The only way I could get from Lampeter to the borderline in London in a day was if I got a bus. There was a bus that took you out of Lampeter and into Carmarthen, and then you got another bus, and eventually, you get to. I think I got to the borderline at 3:30, and there were already like 40 people in the queue in front of me.
Oh no!
And so I knew I kind of probably wasn't going to get in, but I knew I wasn't going to be able to get home that night. So I was just there, so I didn't have anything better to do. So I sort of joined the queue and, met some really lovely people in the queue. And the band turned up at around like 5:30, 6 o'clock, took one look at the queue, and they must have realized that a lot of the people that were queuing here, they knew the gig was sold out. They knew that most of the people in that queue were not going to get in. So they kind of popped in, and then they disappeared. They re-emerged with their instrument cases. Neil and Tim had guitar cases. So did Nick Seymour, the bassist, and then Paul Hester, the drummer, grabs a massive cardboard box from a nearby yard and plonks it in front of him, gets a pair of brushes out, and they start doing an impromptu gig for the queue. Oh. They did about 6 songs just to sort of like play for the people who they didn't think were going to get in. It was amazing. Like the queue just disassembles itself around them. Suddenly it's this little kind of guerrilla acoustic gig. I managed to climb up on top of a kind of post next to a gate and just had a sort of little kind of grandstand view, and it was amazing. And then the queue reassembled itself because everyone knew who was next to them in the queue. And then as it got closer to stage time, I think they were crossing names off the guest list of people who were not likely to turn up, and they were letting people in 5 at a time. And literally, like the minute they came on stage, I was waved in. I managed to get into the gig.
Oh yes.
I know.
I'll be honest, that was causing me too much anxiety. A lovely story it was. I was causing me anxiety.
It was amazing, and that somehow, entrenched my adoration of them even further. I mean, literally, I didn't get back to Lampeter until the following afternoon, and anyway, so I started at Melody Maker. I was very like low down in the pecking order at Melody Maker. I'd left university. I didn't really have any other plan than, if, being adopted by REM and being given a nickname by them wasn't going to work, then my other plan was to just loiter in the offices of Melody Maker and be so annoying that eventually they would give me work to do in order to make me go away so they didn't have to look at me. And that plan worked a bit better. And then around, so this was late 1992, and around the same time, another promising young writer who was kind of emerging on the scene was this girl called Kathleen Moran, who you may have heard of, and she sort of and I was a huge fan of her writing because she was gay. I never met her, but I was like a massive fan of her writing, and I was sort of and so, I would always look out for her name. And then like one day, it was the first time we met, which was in September. I think it was, it was the end of September, 1992, about a month and a half after I'd just moved to London. She hadn't moved to London at that point. She was still living with her family. And I was in Riverside Studios in West London interviewing Levitation for a friend's fanzine. And when my interview with Levitation finished, the band, I remember Terry Bickers from the band sort of looked at me and looked behind me and said, "Oh, well, our other interviews here, it's Kathleen Moran. You must know Kathleen Moran because she writes for Melody Maker as well." And I turned around and I was like, "Oh wow, God!" And I remember sort of thinking, there's no way you're going to think I'm cool or interesting, but I need to somehow find a way to kind of at least give myself a sort of chance to make you think I'm cool or interesting. So they said, the band said, why don't you stick around? And when Kathleen's finished her interview, we'll all go down the pub together. So I thought, oh, that's great, you know. And so we went down the pub, and I just remember the one thing I know how to do is not talk unless I definitely can think of something funny to say. So even if I only think of three, like if I only think of three funny things to say all night, if they're the only things I say, then it surely must follow that every single thing, every thought I have is funny and clever.
You were just 100% funny.
I mean, I could not say, next time I might talk would be March, 1994. Then my record would remain unbroken. And anyway.
We need Kathleen on the next episode to hear her side of the story and how much she actually thought was funny.
Maybe not. Anyway, they must have had it must have worked a little bit because so it finished, and it was quite, she didn't have a place. She lived in Wolverhampton with her family still, and we got on the train to go back to our respective houses, and she said, I think I've missed my last train home. And I sort of said, okay, well, why, you can come and crash on my sofa if you want, She said, that'd be great, thank you. And as we were walking towards my little kind of one like bed sit in Stockwell, I said, there's one thing you should know about me before you come in, full disclosure sort of thing. I said, I'm actually a really big fan of Crowded House, because that was like the least cool. It was my way of saying, like, I'm not cool. This is a. And then she turned around and said, "Are you?" I said, "Yes." I said, "I love them too." And then we just spent the last like 2 hours talking about like why we love Neil Finn and his songwriting, and.
Whatever happened to Kathleen Moran?
Well, she stayed over that night. She stayed. I slept on the sofa, and she slept in the bed because I still didn't think there was any remote chance that she'd be interested in me, and then I couldn't work out why she was kind of she was slightly arsey with me the following morning. But yeah, no, I think she's doing all right. Still, I think I've put her off pretty much all music since, but she still has time for Crowded House.
Yes.
Anyway, anyway, one thing leads to another, and I'll tell you why Neil and his wife Sharon ended up coming to our house. It was 2015, and I'd persuaded Neil to let me put out a single, a sort of 7-inch single of a Crowded House song called "Help Is Coming," because it was around the time those horrible sort of news images of people sort of risking their lives to sort of come over on dinghies to escape war in their own countries, and so there's a very beautiful Crowded House song called "Help Is Coming," which really presciently really sort of expresses the kind of hope that the people have in their minds that when they try and find a safe place to raise their families in, this kind of belief that help might be coming. And Neil very kindly agreed to let us oversee the release of "Help Is Coming" with all the proceeds helping the ongoing effort at the time, orchestrated by Save the Children. And Neil was in the UK at that time, and we had to sort of speak a lot on the phone and stuff to sort of engineer the publicity around it and so forth. And there was an amazing video film that was made to go with the song by Matt Whitecross, who's made lots of videos for Coldplay and directed that amazing Oasis documentary. And and anyway, so so they were in town anyway. So I said, look, can we just? We'd love to sort of like have you over for dinner, and just to say thank you for all that, like for making this happen. And so that was how I ended up sort of thinking, is he going to be terrified if he looks through my records and he sees records he probably didn't even know that he'd made in my rec. Anyway, it didn't really come to that, thankfully. So hopefully he won't listen to this and be retrospectively sort of terrified.
Oh, I don't know. He's a big fan of the Gig Stories podcast, Pete.
I know that we're kind of. I mean, I could talk to you all day, and I'm going to chat to you for a little bit longer. But I'd like to hear about Live Aid, and then we're going to take you into the quickfire round.
So this was a digression, because remember we started talking about how you sort of like. So I was kind of bizarrely loyal towards bands beyond when they stopped having hits, and because somehow some kind of weird part of my subconscious thought they might somehow knock on my door and test me to see if I was really as loyal as I was. Anyway, one band I felt this way towards were the Boomtown Rats. I really liked the Boomtown Rats a lot when I was from about the age of 9. I just thought Bob Geldof was just, one cool customer, and I thought he was like, I didn't really understand why my brother and all his punk friends thought he was an idiot, because I sort of thought that, if you think about it, when you're 9, if you were 9 and you had to form a punk band, you would probably call them something like the Boomtown Rats. That's quite it has a kind of gang thing going on. And I really liked the way he kind of leaned forward into the camera on top of the pops and sort of beckon you in, as if to say, I'm new in town and I've taken over the youth club and I'm going to make everything really cool, and come and disco this Tuesday 6:30. Bring lemonade and
no squares.
Yes, exactly, that kind of thing. Yeah. No straights. And I carried on, but I was very loyal towards the Boomtown Rats right up until they released an album in 1984 called In the Long Grass. And I was even buying their records even at this point, but they really, it looked like the writing was on the wall for them, because no one really sort of cared about them. And I remember Bob was so desperate to kind of reverse their ailing fortunes that they even released a single which it was like a kind of picture, like a clear vinyl disc with a sort of ticket sealed into it. And the idea was they were trying to basically hype themselves into the charts. And the idea was that if you bought this 7-inch single and produced it at one of the gigs on their forthcoming tour, you would be allowed into the gig for free. And it fell foul of the chart regulations, and it got banned from the charts. And Bob was so angry about this that he did an interview on the local TV the local news pop weekly slot, which was presented by Dave Bartram. And I remember, so Bob issued this kind of tirade about how, everyone was hype, hype was everywhere. And this is just like a real injustice, because what could be more musical than offering someone a ticket to go and see your gig? And he was absolutely furious. And then he cuts back to Dave Bartram in the studio, who rather tartly says, well, he's got a lot to say for himself, hasn't he? And I remember thinking that there might be beef between Shabody Body and the Boomtown Rats.
I'd love that. That's the best beef ever, isn't it?
So anyway, basically, so about a month later, those news reports, about the sort of famine in Ethiopia sort of happen, and Band-Aid happens. And I just felt a huge rush of vindication, because suddenly Bob Geldof was not only the hero of pop, he was the hero of everything. He was this Christ, the Bob I had faith in for all these years this kind of Christ-like organizer, this galvanizer of young people, had finally found a mission that was equivalent to his fantastic talents. And so I personally felt very vindicated that Band Aid was a success. And then when Live Aid happened, well, you know, I had to go at all costs. I had to go to Live Aid. And the only reason I did go to Live Aid is because my poor mother, who queued, so it was the morning of Live Aid, I had to do a history GCSE exam. The morning that the tickets went on sale, I had to do a history GCSE exam, and so my mum very kindly queued outside the one record shop in Birmingham, who was selling tickets for Live Aid. She turned up there, even though it's Friday and it was like the day that they had the busiest day. They had a fish and chip shop, and so that was the biggest. You know, you have to get everything ready because obviously cut all the fish and chip all the potatoes. And somehow she sort of managed to find a way of queuing outside Cyclops Records in Birmingham at 7:30 on the day that the tickets to Live Aid went on sale. And there were about two people in the queue behind her that managed to get tickets. So it was almost we just about managed to get sort of tickets. So that was how I sort of ended up going to Live Aid. And it was, the weird thing was, I couldn't find anyone. None of my friends were allowed, because you had to go to London. None of my friends were allowed by their parents to go to Live Aid. So I ended up having to go with this girl who was friends with my older brother, who I think might have slightly fancied my brother, and this was a kind of way of staying involved in our life, in our setup or whatever. Anyway, she was 4 years older than me. It was one of those very awkward things where, you know, she was very nice, she was lovely to me, but she probably didn't have much to say to me, and she probably wanted the ticket more than she wanted like to go with me. Why would she, you know?
So who when you were actually there, we all know the obvious. Freddie Mercury, you know, stole the show. Some people will talk about Bono as well and say that may be where really elevated them.
Totally.
Tell us about someone else though. Who did you think they were just brilliant that perhaps people don't talk about?
Well, the funny thing was in the actual place itself, that, you know, it really was. The Queen came across just as well in the stadium as they did on telly. You know, when I saw them on telly afterwards, U2 was a bit confusing because no one in the stadium could tell where Bono disappeared to for 3 minutes while he was kind of getting the girl from the audience to dance with her. It was still great, but it was not quite the same perspective that you had from elsewhere. I mean, I remember I was very excited about Status Quo, actually, doing Rocking All Over the World. And that just seemed like a very affable way to sort of begin the day. I mean, those really were the best bits, to be honest. I remember, like, it got a little bit, dare I say, boring in the afternoon when you had, like, you know, I like Sade, but Sade wasn't necessarily what I wanted to hear.
No. Am I right in saying that Adam and the Ants played their new single?
Adamant. It was just Adamant, and he thought this would be the perfect opportunity with a global audience watching to relaunch himself with his new single "Viva La Rock." And I mean, now we're all a bit cleverer now. I think really the best way for Adam to have really sold his new single would have been to have done, you know, Stand and Deliver or Amp Musical to remind people what they like about him.
Yeah.
But, you know, you're on a hiding tonight, but people still do it. People still do.
George Michael.
Yeah, I know. What was that? That was the
Olympics closing ceremony.
I know. I mean,
new single. What, George? He can do what he wants, though.
George, we love you, but that's the maddest thing you've ever done. Yeah.
It is.
Well, listen, we're going to crash on into the quickfire round because we don't have much time left. So what's your favourite ever gig? Best gig you've been to?
Well, favourite ever gig. I just You can edit out this very long pause.
No, we like it.
I'm looking
because as well, Pete, we are very much like yourself, Chris and I, and so we realise that any of these questions, the answers could change at any given moment. Because my favourite ever gig will change from day to day.
I think,
and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many. I've got a long, because I wrote a list. There are loads, but actually on this particular occasion, I'm going to say that it was. I'll tell you what. It would be the Africa Express at Glastonbury, because it was a sort of so it was Damon Albarn. It was extraordinary. It was like a 5-hour, set, obviously helmed by Damon Albarn with all sorts of people. I mean, the most amazing thing about it was that it wasn't billed. I think it was 2007 that it happened. And it was at the Park Stage. I think it was the first year there was a Park Stage at Glastonbury. And I was reviewing for the Times. And at the time, the headliners on the Pyramid stage and the other stage, I can't remember who they were, but none of them were sort of really grabbing me. And I was thinking, do I go with duty and just review the headliners are regardless? Or shall I just, because they're both pretty uninspiring, or shall I just quickly wander over to Park Stage and see what's happening? Because I noticed on the thing it said TBC, and I got there and there were maybe like about 100 people at the most watching this thing that was clearly already amazing happening, because it was Damon Albarn and a load of other kind of musicians, and I think Amadou and Mariam were up there, and at some point Baba Mal came up, and you had people like Terry Hall coming on doing a couple of special songs, Mick Jones from The Clash. I mean, it's just constant, ever refreshing kind of lineup, shifting lineup. Of Rashid Tahar did an amazing version of Rock the Casbah. I remember that, and it was electrifying, and it just went on for hours and hours and hours. And like at some point I looked behind me, like 3 hours later I looked behind me, and word has gotten around like the field is full. But that was one of those gigs where, like, I was like 30, I was in my mid-30s, and I was thinking, will I ever feel that sort of sense of abandonment, that sense of just completely transcending at a gig the way I used to when I was in my teens? And like, I thought it might never happen to me again. And it's happened to me literally when I least expected it to, because I didn't know what.
I love that. And it's still, I have that thought as well, Pete. And because of my obsessive nature with music gigs, I think, I hope that feeling doesn't go, but I do still get that. Actually, and it is amazing.
It happens to me more now. I think maybe, I don't know if it works like this for anyone who's had children, but being a parent definitely loosens you up in that way.
I was just going to say, I think since being a dad and since going with can I assume that you go to gigs with your girls now?
Sometimes, yeah, definitely, yeah.
And especially because I know you and I sort of share Glastonbury as an experience, and moments watching my daughter on her mother's shoulders as a, what would she have been, 10, 11-year-old, belting out every word as Florence was on the stage, with just it's just the greatest moment of my life in that time.
It takes you out of yourself, and it allows you to experience things as you would experience them for the first time, because you're watching that happen to this person who you love more than life itself. So
it's amazing.
I think I had that when I was at Latitude. We had taken a small piece of theatre to Latitude in 2018, and I think my son, he was just getting just about too big to go on my shoulders, but not quite. and he went on my shoulders, and there was a surprise guest. It wasn't programmed. It was a surprise guest, and it was Liam Gallagher, and he was absolutely on it. He just packed it full of all the best Oasis stuff. Gabe was on my shoulders, and I was like,
doesn't get better.
Get in. Yeah, exactly. So
I want to go then from, you mentioned Serene there, Pete. What's the most riotous gig you've ever been to?
Riotous, probably, I would imagine something in my teens, really. I sort of I'm just trying to remember. I just consult my list again.
Do you know, because I've perhaps caught you off there, because it just came as you said, that Peace and Serenity, and I know you like all genres, and I was just thinking, what's one that you just go, oh man, that went crazy. That went absolutely crazy.
So the Manics gigs at the Astoria at the end of 1994, with the final gigs I did with Richie, that was obviously intense for all sorts of reasons, and also
and you were at the London Astoria,
the 3 Astoria. They did 3 Astoria gigs on
that's right
nights. And it was just like, it was intense to even begin to cover it.
I'm glad you've backed that up as well, because I do think I've said this at the beginning of when we first started this podcast. I was at the Cardiff Astoria gig on that tour.
Oh, wow.
And from the off, as soon as that siren went off and they came on, I don't know if you remember, they came on to Chemical Brothers remix to Faster.
Yeah.
For the first half of the opening, I was facing the wrong way. I didn't even realize, because there was dry ice everywhere, and the crowd just went absolutely crazy. And that absolutely is one of the most riotous tours I've ever been on. That was
it was
amazing.
Total all or nothing stuff, and
it was, wasn't it?
I've got a VHS bootleg recording of it, which I must dig it out because I've got and see, because I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it since it happened.
I've got that one as well. But you will have witnessed the pillow fight, wouldn't you?
The pillow fight. Oh God! Remind me about the pillow. Yes, God.
They ended up having a pillow fight, and there was feathers and everything everywhere.
Oh my God! I totally forgotten about that. Oh my God.
It's the one tour, if I could, in a moment, if I could say to anyone, you must see this band. Now, we all know I'm self-confessed Manics geek.
Yeah.
It is that tour, that gig. I loved seeing them earlier on. The earlier gigs were great.
Oh, yeah.
But in that moment, that Holy Bible tour was just...
It was. I didn't listen to that record for years. And I've gone back to it lately, and I sort of feel like I've got the kind of slight distance to just enjoy it as an incredible piece of music. But I couldn't listen to it for a long time, not just because of what happened with Richie, but also I interviewed him at the time, and I was very uncomfortable around. I didn't know how to be around them because I was kind of very awed by their intellect. So I would say the wrong things around them. And I was constantly putting my foot in my mouth around them, and so quite slightly, but not, I guess in the scheme of things, none of that matters now, really. We're all young. Everyone was, I now know as a 52-year-old man that even in your 20s, you don't really know that much. Even for people as fiercely intelligent as the Manics were then, probably, James, Nicky, and Sean probably feel like much wiser people than they were then. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
What was your worst ever gig? Name names.
That's a good question. I remember going to an X Factor gig at the O2 Arena in 2000. I don't know, whatever year Ridian was in it, and and I remember thinking, this is just fucking. This is just depressing. It's like. So, this is the manifestation of Simon Cowell's desire to take the music industry back to a pre-Beatles era, when and of course he would, because the Beatles effectively seized the means of production and rendered people like Simon Cowell almost entirely redundant, because Simon Cowell was it's like the archetypal middleman who who divides songwriters from artists in order to sort of, it's divide and rule, isn't it, to elevate his own. And what you have is this very neutered sort of dispiriting kind of spectacle. So I remember I was properly depressed watching the X Factor live tour, whenever that was.
Yeah, we'll take that.
Great answer.
We'll answer.
I know it's not very imaginative, but there you go. Sorry.
No, but it's in that moment, isn't it?
Yep.
Having someone who has seen hundreds and hundreds of gigs as you have, tell me about a moment where and I phrase it like this because I realize these questions again might change, where you just saw the best ever support act, and perhaps they outshone the headline act. When was a time that you just were like, oh my gosh?
There was a Japanese band called the Boredoms who I saw opening for John Cale at the Royal Festival Hall. And
oh wow!
And I like John Cale, and it was a perfectly good, his set was perfectly good. But the Boredoms were doing this. The Boredom setup at the time is they had these kind of three drum kit. I think it was 3 drum kits set up, and it was this kind of like just this elongated sort of space rock happening that was just so visceral and compelling and electrifying that it was actually impossible for anyone to follow it up. And so I think that maybe certainly the Boredoms would be up there. I'm trying to think of any other. You mentioned Radiohead opening for James earlier on. I mean, James are fantastic, and I like him a lot, but that was a tough one. And also sports team. I went to see sports team before Christmas at Brixton Academy, and they were fantastic. They really
brilliant,
really, really good. But I did feel slightly sorry for them because Wet Leg were opening for them.
Yes.
And Wet Leg, were and continue to be having such a moment that that almost sort of stole their thunder. It didn't, but it was kind of close.
They're doing that to everyone, because before Christmas as well, Wet Leg was supporting. Oh my gosh, as if I've just forgotten. My daughter would kill me. Bono's son.
Oh, Bono's son. He's Bono's son in a band.
Oh my gosh, this is awful because I really like them, and the name's just forgotten. He's the singer.
Did you say Bono's son?
Yeah.
The band supported. I saw. I was photographing High Flying Birds, Noel Gallagher and High Flying Birds.
Inhaler.
Supported them. Inhaler.
Oh, right.
That's
Inhaler.
it. And I said to my mate, he's got a real sound of Bono. It really sounds like early Bono.
Oh, wow.
Hang on. Here's a moment here, Chris. I just need to maybe enjoy or just make note of this one. Pete, you must know Inhaler, surely.
I've heard of Inhaler. No, I'm not sure I do. No.
Oh, they can't be a band I've heard of.
They've been around a few years. Oh God, there's I'm really not that. I mean, I'm getting on a bit. I'm not as abreast of things.
Yeah, me too. But, well, they're pretty.
2019, maybe.
Yeah, they're pretty too.
2-3 years,
but in their own way. I don't think it's fair just to keep. But he is the spit of his dad and his performance as well. Okay. And they already as a band sound like they've been together for years. And I took my daughter to see him before Christmas, and they had Wet Leg supporting them. And it was actually the last night of the tour.
Right.
And unbeknownst to the band, halfway through, I'm assuming it'll be their tour manager and whoever came on in high-vis jackets, and they brought on a chaise longue and put it on the stage.
and they had to sign for it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he made them sign for it as though he was like Amazon sort of thing. And the bass player sat on it and played on it.
Genius. The signing.
They just laughed.
The signing for it, especially. Brilliant.
That's a good Wet Leg. Great one. Let's hear your fantasy festival. And as we've said for a couple of episodes now, we realise that our good friend Sean Keaveney has something similar.
Is it? Yeah. But you had the idea first, so.
Well, I can't say that because, we haven't.
Yeah, but Pete can say that.
Yeah, okay, Pete can say that. We invented the wheel here. And as I say, I would love to have Sean on and hear his. But we obviously don't have a whole podcast to do it. Ours is a lot shorter, but
doesn't everyone just say the Beatles? Is that or can you not have?
No, and we point again. James Walsh from Star Sailor.
Yes.
He chose Paul McCartney just ahead of the Charlatans, because I said to him, "Are you going to say the Beatles?" And he said, "No, I don't want the Beatles to headline. I want Paul McCartney." And no one says the Beatles. Everyone backs out of saying the Beatles, which I find very, very interesting. So it's a day festival.
Okay.
You have 4 acts.
Yeah. Okay.
But who is? And it's a long. It's a long afternoon. Who's opening this Paphides Fest?
Okay. Okay. I'm going to open up with oh God, I've got such a long list here. Well, I've got it.
I love it.
And can it be a band? Can you go back in time? So can it be
Yeah.
a band in? Okay. Well, I never got to see Dexys Midnight Runners, so Ray. So the Ray lineup of Dexys Midnight Runners, so that I could finally get to see them, and that's going to be amazing. And then
you're going to open with that.
Oh, maybe not open with them. Okay, I know.
No. You've done it. That is, I mean, those other bands are going to be like, oh wow, we've got to follow that.
I'm going to open with. There was like a supergroup that was formed about, I don't know, maybe about 6 years ago, which featured various members of people like Robin Pecknold from Fleet Foxes were in it, and various other people. I think one of. I want to say Beach House, maybe. Anyway, they called themselves the No Other Supergroup, the Gene Clark No Other Supergroup, and they did the entirety of Gene Clark's amazing No Other album. And I've seen YouTube footage of it, and it's absolutely stunning. And had I known this was happening at the time, I would have done anything to get there and see it. So the No Other Supergroup is going to start off. And then,
I like that.
And then, I know this isn't cool. Do I care?
Doesn't matter.
No. When Sting left the Police and he did that Bring On the Night film, he got these shit hot jazz musicians, and they did this kind of live film called Bring On the Night, and they world tour with those musicians. I think that band was amazing. They sounded incredible. So I'd have
Branford Marsalis and
Omar Hakim.
Was it Omar Hakim?
Yeah. Kenny Kirkland, just the best band ever.
I could have sat here all week and would never have guessed that one.
So I want to, again, because I never got to see them, so I want to see Sting and his Bring On the Night band just do those amazing arrangements of those songs. And then
I'm going to throw a curveball in here.
Yeah.
You've had 2 acts.
Yeah.
We're going to have a break, and during the break, you're going to show a music documentary.
Oh yeah, okay.
Which music documentary are you going to show on the big screens?
Well, something you need it to be something that wouldn't ruin the mood, would you? So I'm just trying to. Oh man. Oh, hang on. Well, I mean, I've already watched Get Back 3 times, and I'm not bored of it. So let's let's do Get Back. Obviously, I'll be talking about it until the day.
All episodes. This is going to be a 5-day festival.
I'll be talking about it until the day I die. Anyway, so as we all and then so that's that, and then
so we've had that. Everyone's been to the toilet, washed their hands.
Yeah, gone home, see their parents, came back.
Exactly.
And have we got 2 more?
Are we bringing Dexys on? Is this when Dexys come on?
We've got 2. No, I've got 2 bands left, haven't I? I've got 2 acts left, so I'm going to go for. I recently bought a live album, which is just fantastic. Linton Kwesi Johnson recorded in 1984. It's called In Concert with the Dub Band, and it's just absolutely electrifying. And again, I've never seen Linton Kwesi Johnson live, and that iteration of that band is just awesome. So that's my 3rd act, and then we finish.
Perfect. And
we finish with Dexys Midnight, the Ray incarnation of Dexys Midnight Runners, that's going to be the best day of my life.
Brilliant.
That is a belter.
Thank you very much.
Belter.
Thank you, Guy.
Love it.
I love that. I would buy a ticket to that. I'd buy a ticket to that festival. Let's make that happen.
Yeah,
slightly impossible, but it would be nice.
I've got like literally like a list of 20 other bands who I'd have on.
Of course you have, and that's exactly what I'd expect as well.
Anyway, we'll ask it again in episode 2, in part 2. So we're going to crash on last couple of questions really quickly. Who do you recommend we go and see live? We've all been hibernating like hedgehogs. Who should we go and see live?
Well, I'll point you to the last gig I went to see, which was Sports Team with my daughter Dora, who very kindly bought us tickets to go and see them, and that was totally life affirming. And maybe Wet Leg will turn up again too. So
yes,
yeah,
brilliant.
Love that, hell of a gig. And then we bring this to an end. It's all about live music, and you just mentioned that you've just recently bought a live album. We just want you to leave us with a recommendation for us and the listener of, and it can be your choice of live something. It could be a live album, it could be just a live track. I was watching last night Bruce Springsteen doing Born in the USA from 2013. Because I wanted to know how it sounded like sort of more recently, and I must have put it on repeat 3 or 4 times. It was just incredible. Or it could just be a live video, like a couple of people have mentioned. The video of Prince at the that's it. That's the go-to, isn't it? Okay, which is brilliant.
I'll be brief. I'll be so 2 live albums that I recommend would be. So I've mentioned the Linton Kwesi Johnson one. Another reggae one, which everyone, if you haven't heard it, is absolute essential listening, is Misty and Roots live at the Counter Eurovision, which was an event held, I think, in Belgium, I want to say. I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
In 1979. And it's just roots reggae recorded immaculately, brilliant energy about it. The songs are beautiful. The entire thing, beginning to end, is just masterful. And there's also a live album that came out very recently, the comeback tour, which and actually the DVD that comes with it is actually beautifully shot. That's a real to see how a live performance can work brilliantly on screen. I'd say this new the album, the comeback tour, especially with the visuals, is directed by Tim Pope. It looks and sounds stunning, and a lot of the songs I think really do exceed their recorded versions. So that's and then in terms of footage, in terms of like YouTube go-to moments, I would sort of I've got to mention Dexy's Midnight Runners 1982 performance on the Tube, because I devote almost an entire chapter to it in my book, and it's the greatest live performance, televised live performance of all time. I really do believe that. And then if you want to cheer yourself up, actually no, and then actually the opposite. If you want an improbably sort of sad, really, and it's a kind of a weird thing for me to recommend, but actually I really like finding moments of emotional intensity in unlikely places. And I'm going to drop another name here, but Russell T. Davis turned me on to this. But he said, he just read my book, and he said, I wouldn't recommend this to anyone, but there's an amazing performance of Lena Zavaroni doing a song called Going Nowhere on YouTube. It's just a light entertainment show from the early 80s. God knows where it came from. I don't know what it is, but it's one of the most heart-stopping, difficult to watch performances I've ever seen in my life. Lena Zavaroni, Going Nowhere. And then you'll want to cheer yourself up. You'll want to cheer yourself up after that. So I will go. Can I direct you to, do you remember Ottawan, who did DISCO?
Yes.
Well,
yes.
Another single they released around the same time as DISCO was a big European hit called Crazy Music, and there's a wonderful version of it they do in the Kremlin with the Russian Red Army Choir, and I can't even begin to describe how strange but uplifting it is. So
I can't.
That is bright. I've not seen that.
Ottawan and the Red Army Choir doing Crazy Music.
Listen, Pete, this has been an absolute joy, and I know I said it before, but we need to have part 2.
I'd be delighted.
I can't. I'm loving your book, but I'm listening to it. I've got the audio book, and I'm listening to it, and it almost I like it in your voice.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you.
It's lovely, and there are 2 bits that I really wanted to mention. One is just being reminded of Dial-A-Disc, which I hadn't thought about for years and years, but I remember listening to the Stray Cats on the phone in my mum and dad's house, and also the other thing is just how amazing the parties sound like in the back room of your mum and dad's chippy. It just sounds like every kid's dream.
I took it for granted, really. I'm very lucky. I could, I'd recommend a chip shop for anyone to have a party in, especially if there are
Definitely
pinball machines. You can't bet.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, it's a cracking read.
Thanks so much, Chris. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah,
No,
and
not at all. Not at all.
to our listeners, if you've not already ahead of the game and read Broken Greek, do it. Seek it out in your bookshops and have a listen.
Thank you.
Pete Paphides, what a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you, guys. Speak soon.
Thank you, mate.
And there we have it, the wonderful Pete Paphides, everyone. I told you. Oh, I could have genuinely, I say this all the time, don't I? I'm so boring that the interview could just go on and on. But it's true, we just have some amazing guests that just make it so easy to talk to. And we say we're going to get these guests back on, and I would love to do that. But Pete, we have to get Pete back on, because he didn't tell us his anecdote about Swedish band, the Cardigans. And I'm not going to spoil it for you, Chris, but it's really amusing.
I think you've told me the story before, and I've promptly forgotten it. So yes,
it's very amusing. We'll have to get him back on. But
yeah, well, he's heavy penciled. We've heavy penciled him.
But it's great, and I love that Pete loves Crowded House, because I've always loved Crowded House, and some of my friends were just like, "What, Winters? You like Crowded House?" And I just think they're fantastic. I love it. So, Pete, I love you for loving Crowded House. And how funny is that, having Neil Finn come over to dinner?
I know. Do you remember Dial-A-Disc? Do you remember that at all? You do?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, was that you or Pete that brought it up?
I brought it up because
yes, that's right.
It did. Yeah, it took me right back. But I did it from a house. But in his book, he talks about doing it from a phone box. So he was going to a phone box and putting, 2p's and 10p's in and listening to music.
Like, what were we doing, paying for like the worst sound ever?
Well, yeah, but also remember,
and it was terrible.
We did have such a thing as the speaking clock, where we would phone up a number and find out what the time was.
That was exciting.
It was crazy.
I used to enjoy the speaking clock. Let me just ask you, Chris.
Go on.
If you were to have a musician and their partner come to your house for dinner, I'm putting you on the spot here, who would you most be nervous about having because of that worry about being just an embarrassing fanboy?
Oh, Tim Booth. Yeah, no question.
He's straight in with James, really.
Yeah, or Jim Glennie, or Larry Gott,
yeah,
or Saul Davis, or Andy Diagram. Yeah, just James, basically.
I love that. And what would you serve him? What would you make for him?
I mean, he's definitely vegetarian. I think he might even be vegan. So I would probably a nut roast or a stuffed pepper with mushrooms, obviously, because they all love that, don't they? The veggies.
They all love that.
And I think I'm speaking to a veggie, aren't I? Yeah. So you love a nut roast or a stuffed pepper?
I love stuffing my peppers. It's great. Oh, Pete Paphides, thank you so much.
Check out the website, because there are videos on there that really shouldn't be on the same webpage as each other, but they are.
You'd never guess it, would you?
No, you'd never guess. So and there's a couple more that I think I'm going to put on, because it was Mike Batt's birthday a couple of days ago.
That's right, yeah.
And Pete was wishing him happy birthday, and he put a bit of footage on where Mike played in a band for the launch of Broken Greek. And so it's quite, I love it when previous guests kind of are kind of together. Involved. Yeah.
And if you're a reader, or if you actually listen to audiobooks, Broken Greek, get your ears and eyes on that, because it is just a fantastic book. You will love it. I promise you.
Get it on. Get it on. Okay, so thank you for joining us. And we will be here with another splendid guest very, very shortly.
We will indeed. And you can keep in contact with us, as always, on our social media pages, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, Gig Stories Pod. And keep sending your messages, your pictures of merchandise, your own answers to the questions we ask of favorite gig, loudest gig, and any experiences and anecdotes. And let us know as well who you'd love to hear on this podcast. And if they're daft suggestions, we'll just never be able to get them on, because I'm not even sure Marvin Gaye is still with us anymore. Bless his heart. That would be a good one. Can you imagine interviewing Marvin Gaye?
Yeah, but he's going to have to wait because we've got Bette Midler in a couple of weeks. So
yeah. Yes, we have. Right after Sting and Elton John.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. We love you lots, and we'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.
See you next time.